समय है विचारों का मैदान, बोल दिखाओ अपनी भाषा में, सब है तैयार। राइट और रॉन्ग में क्या डिफरेंस है, दे दो अपना ज्ञान। Let everyone around you know what it's time for। यही समय है, सही समय है, सही समय है।
India stands as a global powerhouse in the 21st century with a burgeoning youthful population poised to drive economic growth and innovation. Its robust economic performance, driven by factors like a growing middle class, urbanization, and significant reforms, positions India as one of the fastest growing major economies globally. Embracing structural reforms like Digital India and GST, India is hailed as a hub for IT services, space exploration, and startup innovation. Moreover, its active participation in global diplomacy and cultural influences like yoga and entertainment underpin its rising soft power on the global stage. However, amidst these advancements, India grapples with challenges such as poverty, inequality, infrastructure development, and geopolitical tensions. While some view this era as India's decade, even its century for that matter, others argue that the portrayal of these events or trends might be exaggerated for political agendas. Nonetheless, India's potential remains vast, with ongoing efforts to reclaim its civilizational heritage under the vision of Viksit Bharat, reflecting an invaluable moment for its future. So that was the introduction to today's topic. With that, we will begin today's debate. So I would first start with Shaunak. I invite him with his opening statement. So please come and deliver that.
The age is in your hands. Hold it tight. Hold it and make the most of it. These were the words of Swami Vivekananda towards the youth of India. Today, on the eve of International Youth Day, which is held every year on Swamiji's birthday, I would like to take this stage to address how vital the youth is for the growth of our country. Our 600 million strong youth population is not just a mere demographic, but it's the very fabric on which our country can become the Viksit Bharat. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm speaking for the motion, and I would like to point out the recent things which have happened. Entrepreneurship is a pretty booming area, and we all have been facilitated with it. Themes like Skill India Mission and Bankruptcy Insolvency Act enable us to develop startups, to move on from our failures if we have failed, and then again try new ventures, thereby ushering in employment. People talk about moonwalk, but we have done it literally on the moon through Chandrayaan 3. Also, the pandemic of COVID-19 is firmly etched in our minds. India, a country of 1.42 billion people, responded with incredible swiftness. Our highest cases were registered at approximately 330,000, which is about 1/3 of that of the highest cases in the United States. 2.2 billion doses of vaccines administered, 800 million people fed for a span of 2 years, and the list goes on. Economy has always been booming in the recent times by keeping the inflation under the check. That is the silent thief of our purchasing power that we have done consistently. Now, we might always argue that whether or not it is a very perfect time, sahi samay hai ki nahi. But I do believe time is of the essence, and time once gone is gone forever. So this truly is the anmol samay for us to grow, to prosper, to thrive. Thereby, I firmly believe in yahi samay hai, sahi samay hai, Viksit Bharat ka anmol samay hai. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Prachet Ashish for his opening statement.
Even if we just maintain the economic growth rate that we currently possess, by 2047, we will be a $17.7 trillion economy if we just maintain the growth rate. So, यही समय है, यही समय है. In the recent years, many multinational companies have started to come to India, opening up factories and job opportunities for the youth, especially the engineers. This is a great thing. This also brings in more foreign direct investment, and India is also slowly becoming Atmanirbhar. This will give the chance for the youth to develop skills, create new jobs. Indians will now start giving paychecks rather than receiving ones. India is also known as the pharmacy of the world. India produces cheap generic medicines which help them to portray itself as a leading producer and an exporter of medicine worldwide. And the government is also supporting us with the NPTEL Swayam. There are over 1.5 crore registrations and 2,000 crores available, which helps the youth to develop skills free of cost. In the infrastructure development sector, our index got raised to 8.5 last year. We have the dedicated freight corridors, 3,360 kilometers of freight trains only. And then we also have seen India actually ranks third in the number of startups in the world, over 42,000 registered. And an Indian startup called Vegapod Hyperloops is actually presenting themselves in the Edinburgh University Technical Show to show their prototype Hyperloop. This is very nice because only 6 competitors are allowed in the entire world. I would also like to end my speech by saying that if this is not the time, then it was never the time. Thank you.
Those were some really brilliant opening statements by the team going for the motion. Now let us have the team going against the motion. Shaborno and Tiasha, your opening statements.
India. To the whole world, it's the Sone ki Chidiya. A country of prosperity and valor, a gem in the face of the world, is the 5th largest behemoth in economy. Does it provide for its own people? Good afternoon to one and all present here. Myself, Shaborno Chakraborty, representing JIS Group. I completely disagree with the motion today. हाँ, समय हमारा है शायद, पर विकसित होना अभी बहुत बाकी है. We talk about the $5 trillion economy, but does it provide for the basic necessities of a common man? One of which is healthcare. Our government by now spends 1.75% of the GDP on healthcare systems, including the school healthcare budget. I ask you one simple question. Is 1.75% enough for the population which is the largest in the whole world? Where US, UK, Canada, they spend about 15 to 20% on the population which is 1/4 of our population. And as a result, when COVID came in as a wake-up call, it completely crashed. We compromised on every single aspect possible. PPE kits for the doctors were compromised, beds for the patient, and even the oxygen cylinders were compromised. And if I keep this out of the topic, then also there are skyrocketing cases of ADR happening every single day. Just because we do not have the prescription auditing infrastructure in our country in the PV sector. Same with the education sector as well, where we still follow the age-old British framework since India post-independence. And even they have changed their education policies just in the 21st century thrice. We have done it in just thrice in the entire post-independence era. And before talking about unemployment, I think we should talk about educating our youth with the relevant skills in the industry. Finally, I would like to conclude my speech with a quote from Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. ये सत्ता का खेल तो चलता रहेगा, सरकारें आएंगी जाएंगी, पार्टियां बनेंगी बिगड़ेंगी, मगर ये देश रहना चाहिए, इस देश का लोकतंत्र अमर रहना चाहिए. जय हिंद.
Wow. So Shaborno has definitely fired the shots. I would now like to invite Tiasha for her opening statement.
A very good afternoon, respected judges, moderators, my fellow debaters, and everyone present here. I am Tiyasha, and today I am taking a firm stance against the motion of the House. When I was a child and I would study for examinations, my mother would bring me snacks and tell me, "Bhooke peet padhai nahi hoti." As I've grown up, I've realized that this applies to the bigger picture of life. We cannot talk about technological advancements when our stomach is growling with hunger. Despite being a surplus production country, a substantial quantity of India's food and crop gets lost due to inefficient supply chains. In the 2023 Global Hunger Index, India stood at 111 out of 125 countries, number 1 in the child wasting rate. According to United Nations Food Security Report, 53% of Indian women between the ages of 15 and 49 are anemic, and a staggering 74% cannot afford one nutritious meal a day. As the LPG and fuel prices are touching the sky, Indians are struggling to put food on the table. And where are our food providers, our farmers? They are on the roads protesting and striking for a minimum support price. As per NCRB's report, 154 farmers and agricultural laborers commit suicide every single day in India. And a seemingly well-off city-dwelling population is not free of their problems either. Last year, for the second consecutive year, Bangalore, that is considered the Silicon Valley of India, was flooded during the monsoon seasons. Unrestricted sewage influx in the city. People had to be relocated from their homes in tractors and inflated boats. A tier 1 city did not have the efficient town planning and infrastructure to support a rising population and some extra rain at the same time. Lastly, I would rest my case by saying that as India continues to be tormented by its internal conflicts, be it the Khalistan movement in the west, or the Manipur ethnic violence in the east, or communal disharmony or caste-based violence, this is hardly the optimal time for India's rapid progression towards becoming a developed country. Thank you.
Those were some compelling arguments made by both the teams. So now let us have a round of rebuttals. All right, so we would like to begin with the second round now, where I would like to invite Shaunak, who will take on Shaborno.
So those were some arguments from my friend Shaborno. And they reminded me about the ICC World Cup finals. Or rather, I should say the day after the ICC World Cup finals. कोहली थोड़ा बैट सीधा रखता ना, प्लेड ऑन नहीं होता. रोहित शर्मा थोड़ा रुक के खेल लेता, आउट नहीं होता. It's very easy to say than to do things. It's very easy to say that rather than just spending 1.75% of our economy, let's spend a bit more. क्या ही हो जाता है? थोड़ा तो खर्च कर ही सकते हैं. But it's again, all the sayings goes. We also need to remember, like the stat I stated earlier, that India fed 800 million people for a span of 2 years during COVID. That's actually more than the population of Europe. And as far as PPE kits are concerned, let me give you an example. You want to have dal, and it's not there in your house. You go and you buy it. And then you cook it and have it. But the next time, you make sure that you have the things in your house. You learn from your past, you better yourselves, you keep the facilities, and then grow. Learning from the drawbacks or the setbacks which are there are a very essential part of an evolved country. Because there are 100 different factors, 1,000 different situations that come into play, and we need to navigate through these times. COVID was never predicted. When I was giving my ICSE exams, I never thought COVID would come. Neither did the Ukrainians think that Russians would be invading them. Neither did we predict the Israel-Hamas war. So there are things going on, and we need to navigate right through it. And then we try to do our best. And that, I think, is the Viksit Bharat. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Shaborno. Would you like to refute what Shaunak just said?
Shaunak, there is a saying goes, prevention is better than cure. You know that? If we had spent a little more, there is a small report from the Indian Institute of Population Sciences in Mumbai, that if we spend a little more than 5% of our entire GDP on healthcare systems, then we can even get the cheap medicines. I mean, not cheap medicines, the good quality medicines can be brought to some extent, not brought down. And for the other cases, I mean, you said that, about the ICC World Cup. Finally, we won that, right? Finally, we won the World Cup, ICC 2011. Yeah, 2011 won World Cup. 2011 we won, na? For the first time? I mean, for the second time? Yeah. So, in that particular World Cup, everyone said that Gambhir ko century banana chahiye tha. Dhoni 93 mein, Dhoni should have come earlier. Virat Kohli क्यों जल्दी out हो गया? सचिन ने क्यों century नहीं बनाया? फिर भी हम जीते ना? तो अगर वहाँ पे we have spent a little more percent, I mean, people are spending 15-20%. We can't spend 5% on a GDP on healthcare systems. आदमी को strong भी होना चाहिए, healthy भी होना चाहिए, तभी तो देश बनेगा. ऐसे तो हम बना नहीं सकते ना. We are talking about technology. Even there are flaws. Even for the, we all know that the prescription for the COVID vaccines, there were certificates that were linked to Aadhaar. 120 crore people data were leaked from those Aadhaar certificates, from the vaccine certificates. So, and that was also linked to their bank accounts. So, वो भी तो खाली हो सकता है ना? We are just, why can't we, if we are spending everything on growing the technological infrastructure, why can't we just give a small amount to the healthcare infrastructure so that we can save lives of common man? Every time we are getting reports of ADRs, adverse drug reactions, it can just be stopped by providing one center for prescription auditing that comprises of doctors, pharmacists, nurses. Why can't we do that? थोड़ा सा ही तो बढ़ाना है ना. अगर फिर से कोविड आ जाता है और हेल्थ केयर सिस्टम्स क्रैश, तो फिर भी क्या बताते रहेंगे कि हाँ हो सकता था, नहीं हो पाया. नहीं हो सकता है ना. We have to increase it. We can't deal with every time. We can't just say अगली बार कर लेंगे, अगली बार कर लेंगे. कभी तो करो.
So I'm sure Prachetashish, you had heard Tiyasha's opening statement, right? So I would now like to invite him to refute any of the points she had made.
Well, it is true, a hard truth, that India is 111th in the hunger index. But I would also like to point out that malnutrition in India is falling by 1% per year. And secondly, when you talk about infrastructure of Bangalore, that year Bangalore faced unprecedented rainfall. I mean, no one can prepare good enough for a tsunami, right? And when you speak about Bangalore, you should also speak about the developed Gurugram and the upcoming Dholera. So, when you have to speak, speak in the entirety. Thank you.
Tiyasha, it is now your time to take on Prachetashish.
When I spoke about Bangalore, I assumed Bangalore was a part of India just as much as Dholera in Gujarat is. So if I talk about Bangalore, I am talking about India. If I talk about the good, I have to talk about the bad because it is the entire country. Bangalore is India, so is Gujarat. And secondly, in his speech, he talked about higher institutions and skill development and also the Chandrayaan mission and these kind of advancements. I want to bring to your notice a statement made by the ISRO chairperson S. Somanath when he was giving a speech in IIT Bombay just recently, a few days ago. He said that when they hire these engineers from IITs, 60% of them don't want to work in ISRO. So if the supposed cream layer of our skilled engineers don't want to work in Indian institutions and they want to go abroad for better opportunities, more salaries, then how is that contributing to development of India? Also, the pharmacy of the world, we say. I also want to remind you all that when we were at the peak of COVID and we were boasting about indigenous vaccines, before that something else also happened. India was one of the top countries that asked for a waiver on intellectual properties of vaccine so that we could copy from other developing countries and manufacture them in Serum Institute. So it's not just about making, it's about innovating, it's about creating. That is also a sign of a developed country which we should be aiming for. Thank you.
Excellent points made by both the teams, isn't it? How did you find the arguments? Did you find them interesting? Can we have a round of applause? All right, so with that, we would like to quickly start round 3 of this debate, in which I will be asking both the teams one question each. So, starting with the team for the motion. My question to you is, what are the 3 obstacles that can derail India's momentum to become Viksit Bharat, and how do we combat the same?
We are progressing at a very fast momentum, and it is imperative that we keep in mind that there might be certain factors that can be a hindrance to our growth. And if I have to think about it, firstly it would be the judiciary system. Presently we have got at around 50 million cases pending in our judiciary. The common phrase goes, Tariq pe Tariq. The essential startup ecosystem depends upon the enforcement of contract, and that is wholly based on the legal system. So what I do think that our legislature and our judiciary need to work together such that the pace fastens, the number of cases pending they get reduced, and all these legal things can be meted out at a much faster pace. And the second thing would be awareness about the skills that are required. I'm not just talking about teaching about the skills, because the NPTEL Swayam portal is obviously there and we can audit the courses for free. They're taught by the IIT professors, IIM professors. They take the classes there, the recorded ones. But what I do believe that our youth need to know what they have to know in order to get a job. They need to know the skills that are required now such that they can land a good package, they can set up a good career, or they can become good entrepreneurs. And the third thing would be a bit awareness about our taxes. When we take an index of paying direct taxes, India ranks a dismal 116th in paying taxes, and only 2% of our working class pay their taxes. So I would like that if all of us and if more of our people would pay their taxes, then obviously we can put some more money into our economy. Because I take the data from the receipt budget of 2023, the things lie as follows. India gathered at around 33 lakh crore rupees from all of its revenue gatherings, taxes, etc. 10 lakh crore rupees were given to the state governments, and 23 lakh crore rupees were kept by the central governments to sponsor all their schemes and infrastructure and to do their work. But Nirmala Sitharaman had said that they need 19 lakh crore rupees more so that the Indian economy can function. So if we pay taxes, that increases the income of the government, and obviously the debt that we need to take comes down, even if a little bit, but it comes down. So that I think would be the 3 things, which would be judiciary, skill development, and our tax system. Thank you.
All right, so his suggestions for judiciary, skill development, and tax reforms in the country. Now, I would like my question to the team going against the motion. Do you think that the economic growth, controlling of inflation, and welfare schemes like Jan Dhan, where more than 50 crore people in India for the first time got bank accounts, or the construction of 11 crore toilets are media hype?
हिंदी में कहावत है कि जो दिखता है वही बिकता है. हाँ, I think these are all media hype because economic growth, yeah, we are growing at a percentage of I think 7 to 8%. Our GDP is increasing, but our per capita income for an individual in India is less than that of Bangladesh and almost roughly equal to Angola. We are talking about controlling inflation. How is the petrol prices of petrol, rice, wheat, everything is shooting up. And जहाँ तक जन धन की बात होती है, there was this I think report from Bank of Maharashtra that almost I think many cases of fraud was there. I think it's around roughly around 1 lakh bank accounts had some fraudulent activities. That was there in the report of a Bank of Maharashtra. And there was also a case stated by our RBI person, I think SS Mundra. He stated that in Punjab, there was a farmer's bank account that had almost 1 crore rupees after it got opened, I guess. So that was another fraudulent activity that was in Punjab. And जहाँ तक टॉयलेट्स की बात आती है, स्वच्छ भारत अभियान, तो 11 करोड़ टॉयलेट्स तो बने. हाँ, the government has its figures. 11 करोड़ टॉयलेट्स बने. But are they all closed toilets? Mainly, toilets were built for mainly to, you know, he closed places में शौच करना चाहिए. Are they well built? And if they were well built as well, were they properly used? Who is checking that? So I believe that these all things are media hyped. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaborno. I think both the teams made their points very well. And so now, all the 3 rounds are over. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, as we wrap up this invigorating debate, let us make some noise for the enthusiasm these minds have brought to the floor today. Now, it is not just about debating, let me tell you. It is about actively shaping Viksit Bharat. And with that, we come to an end of this lively debate. Let us have yet another round of applause for these bright minds who are playing a key role in the future of our nation. Any guesses who the winner of today's debate is? Team for the motion or team against the motion? All right, so the winner of today's debate is team for the motion, Shaunak Sinha and Prachitesh Bhattacharya. Please come to the stage to collect your certificates.
यही समय है, सही समय है, विचारों का मैदान. बोल दिखाओ अपनी भाषा में, सब है तैयार. राइट और रॉन्ग में क्या डिफरेंस है, दे दो अपना ज्ञान. Let everyone around you know what it's time for. यही समय है, सही समय है.
A special shout out to Shaborno Chakraborty for his exceptional oratory skills. He's one immensely eloquent and exceptionally talented lad, and there were some really compelling arguments put forth by him.
यही समय है, सही समय है.
So, good afternoon, friends. It's a big pleasure to be here at JIS. It's also my hometown, Kolkata, so it's a special pleasure to be here to see all of you. The reason I wanted to give this talk is because this is actually something that is important to understand. Now, in recent years, you may have seen that there has been a lot of debate about the nature of our nationhood. And this goes to the crux of what that you are seeing around you. See, as we speak, India is the world's 3rd largest economy. We are the world's fastest growing economy. In the next 18 months alone, we are likely to go first past Germany and then past Japan to become the world's 3rd largest economy. So, we are now the 5th largest economy. Within 3 years, we will be the world's 3rd largest economy. Now, this is, of course, much debated in the newspapers, so not telling you anything really new. But the important part here is that you realize that we are not just building an economy. We are actually rebuilding a civilization. And it is very important that all of you understand what we are trying to do, because we are actually trying to build a civilizational nation that has been in decline for thousands of years, but is now, after a long, long time, trying to regain its place and rightful place in the world. The fact is that there is a need to tell every generation the story of what makes us a people. So let's go back to the very beginning. So where does the word Bharata come from? And the earliest mention of the word Bharata comes from the Rig Veda, which is a text, as you know, which is about from the Bronze Age. There's a debate about how old it is. It's at least 4,000 years old. My sense it is about 6,000 years old text. And this text mentions a tribe in Haryana called the Bharata or Trutsu tribe. It had two names, the Bharata tribe and the Trutsu tribe. And it's a tribe which lived along a river called the Saraswati. Now this river does not exist anymore. It dried up a long time ago. But at that time there was this river called the Saraswati. And this river is the most important thing that is there in the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda keeps talking about the Saraswati river. Long after it has dried up, we still remember this river as the goddess of knowledge because our civilization started on its banks. And in fact, on Saraswati Puja, even today, when you do Saraswati Puja, you will remember at the end of it you say, Bhagwati Bharati Devi Namaste. It's a memory of the Bharata tribe that lived along the banks of the Saraswati river, and that is why the river itself was called Bharati. And it's mentioned numerous times. It's called the mother of rivers. It's mentioned 72 times in the Rig Veda. In fact, it's mentioned much more than any other river, whether the Ganga or any other river. So, the question is, where was this river? Because after all, this river does not exist today. And very often, colonial historians and others as well, Marxist historians for example, keep saying that this is actually a mythical river, that this river never existed. But the Rig Veda itself tells us where it is. It's not in Central Asia, it's right here where it is. So there is something called the Nadi Stuti Suktam in the Rig Veda, and I'm mentioning this here, and I've given exactly in my presentation the exact hymn, the line, exactly where it is, where it states. There is a hymn which enumerates all our rivers from east to west. It goes Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Shrutudru, which is the Sutlej, Parushni, which is the Ravi, Ashkini, Chenab, and so on. Now, why is this important? It's important because this river clearly lies between the Yamuna and the Sutlej. So one thing we know that this river, when it flowed, the Saraswati was between the Yamuna and the Sutlej. We also know one more thing about it, which is that it flowed from the mountains, the Himalayas, to the ocean. Now the problem is there is no such river today in that area. But the question is, was there thousands of years ago a river like this? And it turns out there was. So if you can see that there was indeed such a river. You can see the green lines. That is the dry riverbed of a river called the Ghaggar. And the Ghaggar, which still exists, and you can see that on Google satellite maps, by the way, after monsoons flows even today up to Rajasthan. So it flows out of the Shivalik hills, which are the foothills of the Himalayas, through today's Haryana into northern Rajasthan, into Pakistan, and back out into what is today the Run of Kutch, which was originally the estuary of this river, which is, if you know where the Run of Kutch is, it's these salt flats. But it wasn't the salt flats 5,000-6,000 years ago. 5,000-6,000 years ago, the Run of Kutch looked like the Sundarbans. And this whole area was wet. So you had here large numbers of cities. Today we have a desert in this area, but there were large numbers of cities. And you can see most of what you know as the Harappan cities are actually along the dry riverbed. And you can see the Harappan sites are not along the Indus. They're actually along this dry riverbed. And about 2000 BC, which is 4,000 years ago, there was a major climatic change and this river dried up. And this is also mentioned in our sacred texts that this river dried up 4,000 years ago. So the question arises, why is this river, why am I going on about this river? Why is this important to the Bharatas? The reason is that there was a tribe that lived over here called the Bharatas, and they knew their land as the land of 7 rivers. This is the first and original name by which the Bharatas called their civilization. It was called Sapta Sindhu, land of 7 rivers. So where were these 7 rivers? Now somebody may think that this includes the rivers of Punjab and includes the Saraswati and Sindhu and so on. But we know that all these rivers used to flow into the Saraswati. So it is definitely not the rivers of Punjab and so on. In fact, the Rig Veda mentions that all these rivers came together and they flowed into the seventh with copious milk. So we know that these were all tributaries of the Saraswati. We'll now move into the foreign descriptions of India after the ancient period. And you can see that if you go eastward and westward, there is some differences. So I told you that the word for, if you went west from India, the word became Hindu from Sapta Sindhu. Now Hindu became Indu or Indoi or Indica among the Greeks, and that's why we get the name India. It's a very ancient name. Not as ancient as the name Bharata, but it's a very ancient name. And if you went eastward, the word went from Sindhu to Yandu, Kiangzu. These are the names that the Chinese had for us. Eventually it became Shinto. And in fact, the Japanese have two religions. One is Buddhism, the other is Shintoism. And Shintoism is derived directly from Hinduism. The same word is just that they pronounce Hindu as Shinto. It's the same word. So the word Sapta Sindhu is clearly important. And much later, medieval Arabs call us Al-Hind. And you have Al-Biruni and others writing books about Al-Hind. But what is important that throughout this period, people realize that they're all separate kingdoms, but these people are a civilization. There's something uniting these people. And this is not debated by any of these people. The Greeks accept that there may be many kingdoms in India, but they have a civilizational nationhood, a civilization sense of themselves. This is also something that Al-Biruni writes 1,000 years ago. So the idea that we think of ourselves as a civilization is not new. If we now move into the next slide, this shows through in many, many things, even in medieval India. So I talked about very ancient India, then I talked about Puranic ancient India. Now I've come to medieval India. And in medieval India, you see, we continue to have this idea of Shakti Pithas. Now look at where all the Shakti Pithas are. There's a concentration in the east, Bengal and Assam and etc. There is obviously Shaktiism is very strongly practiced in this part of the country. I'm a Shakta myself. But you see, it's spread everywhere across India. It's not randomly spread. The southernmost Shakti Peeth is in Kanyakumari. The northernmost is in Pakistan-controlled Kashmir, in Sharda Peeth. The easternmost Shakti Peeth is where? It's in Tripura, Tripura Sinduri. In fact, the state of Tripura is named after it. And the westernmost is in Pakistan and Balochistan. It's Hinglaj Mata. So you can see, this is again, it's a landscape, the same Bharata landscape, south of the Himalayas, north of the ocean. And again, this idea of unity is still there. So what happens? What is the story of the Shakti Pitha? These are all the parts of the body of Mata Sati. So why are they scattered in this way? They're scattered in this way because of an interesting story. The story is that Sati was actually born as a human. And she had a father called Daksha, who was very, very unhappy that Sati married this somewhat wild god called Shiva. So Daksha decided to organize a great homa or a yagya. And in that yagya, he called all the gods, he called all the rishis, he called all the people. He also called Sati, but he did not call Shiva because he disapproved of his son-in-law. So Sati turned up and she saw that her husband had not been invited. But it was not just about his husband not being invited. Remember that contract that all the gods have a place around the fire? So this yagya had violated that contract that all the gods had a place around the fire. So in that sense, this yagya was actually already been violated. It was no longer a valid yagya. So what she does is she violates the fire and jumps into the Havan Kund and sacrifices the Havan and therefore destroys it and dies as a result. She burns to death. And then Shiva hears about this and is absolutely angry and furious about this. So he arrives at the scene, lifts her body and says that he's going to destroy the world. So what is the messaging here? The messaging here is that these conflicts between these different gods was going to destroy a civilization. It violated a civilizational contract. So it was going to lead to great destruction. So Shiva threatens to destroy the world, and Vishnu, realizing this, cuts up her body and scatters it across the landscape of India. And literally in her own body, she unites the whole country back. So this is again, in a sense, just like with the last contract of the Rig Vedic chant, this is a uniting of the sacred landscape of Bharata. Okay? This same contract, by the way, is again reiterated in many, many stories. You'll see many, many stories in India is about devotees of one god refusing to worship another god. This happens, by the way, for Holi also. Holika is all about a Shaivite not allowing his son to worship Vishnu. And that also leads to a bad outcome. And we worship Holi in the evening before Holi. There's Holika Dahan. This is also about the same idea that all the gods have a place around the fire. So this is our civilizational contract. Now move to the next slide, please. Now, you have now come to the late medieval period and you are now in the 8th century. What does Shankaracharya do? Shankaracharya comes from southern India, southern tip of India, Kerala. And what does he do? He goes on a Digvijay Yatra across India and he debates all the great thinkers, rishis, etc. of that time. But again, notice that his travels around India are not random. They travel around in a particular shape, which is also the shape of India. And then he also sets up 4 mutts. These mutts are not random. One is in the north, it's in Badrinath. One is in the west, it's in Dwarka. One is in the east, it's in Puri. And one is in the south, Sringeri. Notice 4 cardinal places. What is it doing? Again, the same idea of uniting this national space. Over and over again, the same idea is being reiterated. Now, I want to say that now we are in the modern period, 1801. Okay? So the British told us that we had no sense of nationhood. Well, this is a declaration from Trichy in southern India by a rebel called Maradu Pandian, who had rebelled against the British. Remember, one of the first places the British conquered was in Bengal, but the other place they conquered was southern India from Madras Presidency. And there was also, just like we had a Sannyasi rebellion here, they had the rebellion of the Polygars. And during the Polygar, the rebellion, the uprising, the Polygars against the East India Company, their chief, Maradu Pandian, made a declaration in Trichy in 1801. Now, it is very important to read what it says. It says, to the castes and the people, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaisyas, the Shudras, and the Musalmans. This is interesting, but because by this point, the Muslims were considered a part of the civilization, that in the Jambu subcontinent of Jambu Dweep is another name for Bharata, this notice is given. So it is important, this notice that the declaration of freedom that Maradu Pandian makes, he doesn't say we are making this for Trichy. He doesn't say this is for the Tamils and the Dravidians. He says it, this is for Jambu Dweepa. This is for all of India, the subcontinent. And he says we are declaring freedom from these invading East India Company people. So it is very important that again, this ancient idea that was alive in the medieval period is again clearly there in 1801 with Maradu Pandian. And when Vivekananda goes on this trip around India, again notice he's not doing a random landscape. He's not moving around randomly wherever he wants. This is a trip that he's doing in a particular pattern. And you can see he starts in, of course, right here, Dakshineshwar. And he goes to northern India, then he goes to western India, and then he goes down all the way to southern India, to the southern tip. He goes all the way to Kanyakumari, and then on a rock out at sea, he meditates. There's still a rock temple there if you go there in southern tip of India in Kanyakumari. So he's going to a specific place. And look at the landscape. Again, it's a very specific landscape that he's traversing in a specific way. This is again 1890 to 92. So this is a reiteration again of our sense of nationhood. So now that I've given you a very long history of this, what am I trying to say? The point I'm making is, you will see intellectuals, sometimes political leaders make statements like, there is no such thing as India, it's just a collection of states. It's not a collection of states. We have always had, from a very ancient time, a very strong sense of being a people. This doesn't mean that we are not evolving or that somehow we are pure. Throughout these thousands of years, we have, through invasion, through trade, through internet, we have imbibed lots of new ideas along the way. These ideas have evolved, so our sense of nationhood has evolved. But this, and the borders of modern India may indeed be modern, but the idea of our civilization is certainly very, very old. So the point is, it's an old, evolving idea. It includes in it many completely modern things. For example, cricket is today a part of our civilization. The English language in which I'm talking to you is a part of our civilization today. Tomatoes and potatoes were brought to India by the Portuguese, but they are totally part of our cuisine today. That's perfectly fine. But that doesn't mean, just because we imbibed so many things along the way from the rest of the world, that we do not have a sense of ourselves. And the founders of the Republic of India were very conscious of this, and that is why they mention it right in the beginning of our constitution. Move to the next slide. So Jawaharlal Nehru, on 15th of August 1947, what does he say? He says, the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. Now his great-grandson may also question whether we are a nation or not. But the fact of the matter is that Jawaharlal Nehru said the soul of a nation, long suppressed, finds utterance. For that to happen, by the way, the soul of that nation has to exist. The nation itself has to exist, right? And that is why also in the very first line of our constitution we say, in the English version it says, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states, right? It is India, that is Bharat. And by the way, if you flip it in the Hindi version, it says Bharat, that is India. So both the names are valid. They are both ancient. The name Bharat is our indigenous name for ourselves. But the name India, although it's not indigenous, is very, very old, and we have used it ourselves for a very long time. So it is also valid. And we are not even unique in having two names for ourselves. There are many other countries in the world which have two names. The Japanese call themselves Japan and Nippon. The Germans have Germany and Deutschland. The Dutch call themselves Holland and Netherlands. The British have Britain and UK. So nothing very unique to us. So we also have two names, India and Bharat, and both of them are valid, and we intend to use both of them. There is no reason for there to be any controversy about why we use both these names, and they should be used interchangeably. So I hope you understand why is it that we have begun to use this name when you say the President of Bharat or the Prime Minister of Bharat, and use these much more, this name, this indigenous name of India. This is why we want to do it, because it is a very old name. It is a name of a civilization that has existed for a very long time, and we have a strong historical basis to use of this name. Move to the next slide. Now, what I am saying, these debates about the name, about our sense of nationhood, is not something that the people who wrote our constitution did not think about. They realized that at some future date, there will be some fellow who will stand up and say, it says in India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. Therefore, we are just a union of states. What is there about nationhood? So therefore, Ambedkar, in a speech to the Constituent Assembly on the 4th of November, 1948, clarified very, very clearly what he meant by this statement. He says, though the country and the people may be divided into different states for the convenience of administration, and that the country is, for the convenience of administration, the country is one integral whole. Its people, a single people living under a single imperium, derived from a single source. The drafting committee thought that it is better to make it clear in the onset than to leave it to the speculation or to dispute. So this is not something that we are debating today, that suddenly Arnab Goswami needs to clarify this in a debate on his show, This was debated in the Constituent Assembly, and the Constituent Assembly was very clear what India, that is Bharat, means. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Tanushka
Hello.
Das from Nagaland Institute of Technology. My question is, do you think India is undergoing a cultural and economical renaissance?
Absolutely. What do you think? I mean, just look around you. Look at the amount of economic activity that is suddenly happening. Our position in the world is suddenly changing. Now, of course, it means that we are living in a construction zone and may not always be pleasant in terms of air quality. But the fact of the matter is that the amount of economic activity that we are now generating in just these last few years, and the amount of growth that we are now generating is almost now a sixth of the world's GDP growth. This is about the size of finally the size of our place in the world. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, take it to somebody else somewhere.
India has been exceptional to growth when it comes to GDP. How do you think India will keep up the momentum?
So first important thing to realize is that there is nothing God-given about growth. Okay, there are many countries in the world. Many of them have the same demographic advantages we do. There's one right next door to the west of us. Their demographics is not that different. They are also, in fact, they are somewhat younger than we are. And yet Pakistan is a mess. So there is absolutely nothing God-given about growth, prosperity, and success. It is something that we have to make it happen. And that requires us to be single-minded about pursuing development, growth, progress. It also means that you have to keep doing reforms. And some of those reforms may not be easy. So for example, you were around just a few years ago when we introduced GST, right? Now, before we had GST, the country's tax system was an absolute mess. Every state had its own tax system. There were different tax rates in different places. If a product had to go from Mumbai to Delhi, it had to go through every state. Different taxes were paid. There was lots of scope for corruption and all kinds of things were going on. It was actually more difficult for Mumbai to trade with Delhi than it was for Mumbai to trade with Shanghai. It was that complicated. And we knew that at some point we had to change it to a GST system. Okay? But nobody would do it because no matter whoever did it would have a really tough time doing it. So this debate about GST was going on when I was in school. When I was your age, back in the early 90s, somebody said, no, we need to have a nationwide GST. And yet it was only in 2017 that we finally did it. And let me tell you, when we did it, we knew that for the first 6 months there would be absolute chaos. And there was, because it's a completely new system. Many of the back-end stuff that we had created, we didn't know. When you're introducing 1.4 billion people suddenly have a new tax system, there's going to be chaos. No matter what we did, when we introduced it, there would be problems. And there was, but it requires a certain level of political will to be able to stand through that cycle and take those tough decisions, even when you know a lot of the times it will go wrong. So what has happened is that we are at a time where we have a political leadership, but also we have a population that is willing to take big leaps of change. So same thing happened during COVID. We took some very difficult decisions during COVID. Keeping 1.4 billion people stuck in a lockdown for months on end is not fun. I can assure you, as the person one of the people who had to manage the system during that time, it was no fun at all. And yet both the leadership, political leadership, and the population took it. So what I'm trying to say is that the path is difficult. It will require lots of difficult reforms, sacrifices, and your generation will have to do this. My generation is doing whatever it is doing today. Maybe for another 10 years, I'll be around to take care of that. After that, you will be having to take these decisions. So what is important is that we have a generation, young people, who are willing to go out there and take risks. Whether it's entrepreneurship or policy or whatever it is.
We have become the most populous country in the world. So no country perhaps can be without any challenges. So On the other hand, we have the IoT and other technologies coming, and we have the most important, the most populous country in the world. So how to address the challenge, right? So how to address this issue?
So you're absolutely right. We are now the world's most populous country. But let me point out that the rate of our population growth has dramatically slowed. So, one of the reasons we are the most populous country in the world is also that China's population is actually now shrinking. Our population is still growing, but at a very relatively slow pace now. It'll keep growing for the next decade or so, 15 years, but it'll be growing at ever slower pace. But anyway, your point is well taken. What do we do with this large population? And of course, our labor force is going to keep growing for some time, another 25 years, because many of the people who are now children will be still entering the workforce. And this will happen at a time where artificial intelligence and other technologies will be there. Now, we can take two views on the matter. Either we can be fearful of technology, or we can embrace it. Now, my view is that, look, technology will happen whether we like it or not. So whether we like it or not, these changes will happen around us. If we don't embrace it, somebody else will. So the most important thing is that we need to remain open to these technological changes. We should not attempt to save jobs that are becoming outdated. Some jobs will become outdated. What we need to focus is on reskilling, on transitions, and so on. One advantage, of course, is that unlike, say, Europe, where the population is already so old that reskilling them will be very difficult, a large part of our workforce is either already in universities or will be in the university system in future. So these are not populations that have already got stuck in old technologies. So this is something that institutions like yourself have to play a major role in doing. Do not get stuck in what old curriculums are. Don't worry about what used to be taught 10 years ago or when you were in college. As a teacher, it is your job to see what is happening today, what are the possible things that are emerging, to create curriculums which fit into the jobs that are emerging today, not what used to happen 20, 30 years ago. Many of the traditional institutions will actually have great difficulty in changing their curriculums. Ironically, young institutions like JIS actually have a better chance in doing this. And I'll give you a good example of how we have done this in the past as well. In the 90s, we suddenly emerged out of thin air as a software power. Did it happen because of Delhi University? Did it happen because of presidency? No, it happened because of NIIT. Out of thin air, an institution, a network appeared. Every lane all of a sudden seemed to have an NIIT. And it is NIIT that trained all these new software engineers. So this is the game. Flexible training systems that give skills, particularly institutions like yourself, that are willing to change with the times, will actually play a very big role in skilling India for this new era that we are entering. With that, let me stop, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a long day for all of you. Thank you. Let me end by saying, Bharat Mata ki
Jai.
सही समय है